Good evening, no one, and welcome to the opening session of the Lompoc City Council. It's time for roll call.
Councilmember Martiner? Present. Councilmember Costa?
Present.
Councilmember Lingle? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Starbuck?
Present.
Mayor John Lynn?
Here. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, we'll just keep going while she works on the light. No, wait. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you got it.
But it's not going to stay.
Yeah, it is. Put the little green thing in there.
I didn't do it.
Oh, okay.
I'll fix it when you guys are in closed session.
I fixed it. I have experience. Okay, and now oral communication, and there's no one here, so we'll close oral communication, and we'll go to the closed session in the utility conference room, where we'll discuss 3 items pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6. The City Council will meet with its labor negotiators to instruct them regarding negotiations with the Lompoc Police Officers Association. Item number 2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to subdivision C of section 54956.9, 3 matters, and probably not the questions for the city administrator's performance review. And away we go. Sorry for the delay. We had a very full schedule in closed session, and city attorney will report out on the closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 reportable items. One is that on one of the things being discussed was a Habitat for Humanity's property that was purchased with a loan from the agency, and the loan was due in July and it wasn't repaid, and we have been given an offer to accept a deed in lieu, which means we'll own the property, and the successor agency board had said, yes, we'll accept that deed in lieu. And then the other issue that I need to report out is there's a group of cities that are challenging what's called a cleanup legislation to that bill that dissolved all redevelopment agencies. It's AB 1484, and it has some provisions in it that are very detrimental to cities, because if certain things don't happen, then the state can take the city's property tax and sales tax if the agency doesn't pay back things that the state thinks that the agency should pay back. And that's AB 1484, and the city council or successor agency has agreed to challenge that law along with about 15 other cities, and I need to report that out because you're initiating litigation. And that's it.
Could you report the amount of money committed to that, please?
Oh, sorry. And the cost to the city is $6,400.
All right. And next, an invocation by Darren. If you'd all rise, please.
Let's pray. Almighty God, we come before you today taking a moment to give thanks. Thank you that as this meeting gets underway, we can ask for your divine wisdom, help, and strength for these proceedings tonight. Thank you that you are never too busy to hear our pleas for help. Thank you that you are never too concerned about other matters to not also give attention to the matters that are weighing heavy upon us. Thank you that just as each one of us who is gathered in this room tonight, or maybe watching this from home, wants the best for this great city of Lompoc, you also want what is best for this city and its citizens. Thank you that you care for the least among us just as much as you care for the great among us. Tonight I pray that you would bless this city. I ask that you would give this mayor and these council members wisdom to be the leaders you have appointed them to be. Help them do what is right and not merely what is easy. Help them act swiftly and justly with fairness towards everyone and every matter that is to be considered. Finally, thank you for these men and women who willingly serve this city as our mayor and city council. Bless them as they desire to be a blessing to this fine city of Lompoc. In your most holy name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now we have a presentation from the Community Action Commission on the CalGRIP grant. Easy to say.
Easy to say. Thank you. My name is Fran Foreman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Action Commission of Santa Barbara County, CAC, otherwise known as. And we were fortunate enough to work in a partnership with the City of Lompoc to apply for funding. New funding to the City of Lompoc comes from the state, and it is a GRIP grant. So if you want to know what GRIP is, it's up there. It's Gang Reduction, Intervention, and Prevention Programs. So this partnership was created, and I want to acknowledge Laurel Barcelona for agreeing to work with us on trying to bring these resources to the community. And we worked directly with the Lompoc Police Department, and that was the person that we worked closest with on this was Captain Deming. And I'll have a little story to tell that I'll tell as I go through this as to how this came about. Next. Oh, am I the clicker? I am the clicker. Okay. Before I do that, though, I just have to give you the big picture of who we are. We are a county-wide agency, and our mission is simple. It's to enable low-income families to achieve stability. Here in Lompoc, we have several services, but for the most part, we could put it in these categories. It's Head Start. There's a healthy lunch program for seniors. We do energy assistance where we help folks pay their bills, their energy bills. We weatherize homes, and several youth programs. But tonight we're going to talk about the CalGRIP program, which is a brand new program, and it grew out of the Youth Corps. So these are various pictures taken of the Youth Corps, several of them in Lompoc. And CAC ran a program called Youth Corps. It was a countywide program. The funding came from the Workforce Investment Board, ran very successfully for 3 years, and that funding ended. So, frankly, we saw that here in Lompoc there was such an interest in keeping that program going. And there was a community group that got together, calling themselves Friends of Lompoc. Some of them are here today. And we looked for ways to sustain this program. And then, lo and behold, this opportunity came along. So, really in partnership with Laurel, who agreed, because keep in mind, this is funding that comes to the city of Lompoc, and it pays for this CalGRIP program. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the program is. So, as I mentioned, it's a program with the city of Lompoc, specifically the Lompoc Police Department. The funding is from the state of California. It's a 2-year program. It began July 1st. There's an advisory group that meets regularly to help advise the program. It includes the DA, representatives from schools, the probation department, and various representatives from law enforcement. There'll be 50 youth served, 25 per year. There is a required curriculum that we use. It must be evidence-based, so just for your own information, it's a curriculum that's called Project Toward No Drug Abuse. We have no choices on that. But ours is different in the sense that we're running it as a youth corps model. So cities can make decisions about how their CalGRIP program is. And here in Lompoc, based on the successful model of the youth corps, this program is modeled on a youth corps model. What does that mean? It's a lot of mentoring. It's a lot of one-on-one relationship building with youth. It's case management. It's working on group projects and activities for the benefit of the community. Bottom line, it's about helping kids positively head towards school completion and employment and not in gangs. So that is, a very simple version of what is CalGRIP and what CalGRIP is paying for. Just when you write grants, you have to have outcomes. You all understand this very well. People want to know, what is this paying for? So these are some of the expected outcomes of those 50 youth that we'll be working with. I won't read them to you, but for instance, that 75% of them are on the road to completing their credits to graduate from school. What I'd like to do is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here tonight. I'm really here to tell you a little bit about CalGRIP, to thank you for your support, because we could never do this without the support of the city of Lompoc, to acknowledge the police department and particularly the support of Captain Deming through the Youth Corps model and through the development of this. And I think I can speak for him because of his belief in seeing the recidivism rate of the kids become non-existent. He did not see the kids that were involved in Youth Corps become involved in any kind of criminal activity. So special thanks to Lompoc, special thanks to the city, special thanks to the police department, and special thanks to the group of the Friends of Youth Corps members. Some are here tonight. There's a picture there of Hank Galena right there. Two members I really want to mention who helped make this happen, two citizens of Lompoc, Tim Harrington and Bob Manning, who really helped us to get support and to sustain this program. So with that, I will answer any questions. Hope that they're not that technical, because I'm not directly running the program, and get back to you with any technical questions that you might have. And just say I do appreciate the city of Lompoc on many levels and in many of our programs. So with that, I conclude my presentation and ask if there's a question.
Councilmember Starbuck.
What other cities are doing this in the county?
Well, in our county, city of Santa Barbara has been doing CalGRIP. And the other city that just got a CalGRIP grant the same time we got ours is in Carpinteria. Santa Maria hasn't thrown the hat in the ring. I think to be successful, it has to build on something. So I think that we were fortunate that we were able to build on a model. But here in our county, those are the only cities right now that have CalGRIP. In the California, there are many cities, but I just know about our county.
Are you going to be able to take over the equipment and stuff from the other program, the Youth Corps program?
Oh, good question. Not all of it. Some of it. We were able to take over some of the equipment, but we've been able to keep going. I mean, this is not all that's supporting Youth Corps. This is the part that this is supporting is just the case management part. I really should deeply also acknowledge the county of Santa Barbara and Supervisor Joni Gray. Supervisor Joni Gray, it just worked out. She gave a proclamation to Youth Corps. We happened to be there. We were in our last month of operation, and the county said, you know, we have some work that we need to get done that's not taking work away from anybody else. They couldn't find people to do this work, and they hired the Youth Corps. So, like I say, you might see crews out there working. The work part of it is not being funded by the CalGRIP grant. It's not enough money. But the people part of it is, the case management, the working one-on-one with the kids.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, and
Thank you
appreciate
so
all
much.
you've done.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Laurel.
And our next presentation will be the revised draft post-construction stormwater management requirements for development projects in the Central Coast region.
Thank you, Council. I just wanted to come before you very briefly to talk about the changes that have come through since you wrote your letter on the Central Coast joint effort requirements. And since that time, there have been 3 reissuances of various, with corrections, changes, those type of things. And the most important ones that are going to affect people, as we had noted, we don't really favor the 95th percentile storm infiltration requirement because we don't think it's feasible. They kept that in, unfortunately. It hasn't gone out yet. There was some minor relief given in that they reduced the relief for redevelopment to half of 95%, but that's still going to be a very significant amount of water. They also allowed for some provision for a 10% of the property to be dedicated to infiltration, but it's all pretty nebulous at this point as to how that would really work out. The requirements are scheduled to take effect, I believe, on March 5th of 2013, and they would apply to any projects, including projects that required building permits that created or replaced over 2,500 square feet of impervious area. One of the things that was a kind of a big surprise, and it's in a little kind of a footnote under exceptions, is some language that suggests that the regional board say that a discretionary project that is complete, for example, in the planning division before September 6th, when they're going to have their hearing, if they adopt it on that date, will have the opportunity to argue that they don't have to meet the full requirements of the new regulation, but they would make that requirement an argument for that requirement reduction before the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board's executive officer. And that has caused some confusion because then people are saying, well, does that really mean that on September 6th this is going to be effective? It's not clear what their intent truly is. And so that's one of the things that may need to be clarified at their hearing, which is on Thursday. And it will be in San Luis Obispo at the regional board office, and I believe the meeting starts at 8:30. The regulations are proposed to apply even to building permits, and this new exceptional language also had a stipulation that if a project required multiple building permits but did not require a discretionary review, say design review in front of the Planning Commission, and just building permits, then if they had received one building permit had been issued of the series that they needed before the effective date of the regulation, then they would be exempted from the requirements. So at this point, we wanted to bring this up in a public forum. We wanted to let people know that there is some question and concern about these issues. We have notified those applicants that we know are in the process of trying to make application to the city for projects, and also once they take their action, we'll put some additional notification up at the building counter so that hopefully those who are coming in for building permits will not be totally surprised at the new requirements. Thank you, and are there questions?
So, for instance, a rainstorm comes and 5 inches of rain falls on a given piece of property. How much of that 5 inches of rain needs to be percolated?
Under the new regulations.
The new hideous regulations.
Right. And they are very convoluted, and they're changing literally daily. I received a revision just about 4 o'clock today.
They knew you were coming here. They're trying to, get ahead of it.
But at the same time, and we're kind of, those of us who are the regulator are kind of working together to try and make sure we're understanding it the same way. It looks like over 3.3 inches would need to be contained, treated, potentially infiltrated on any site for the area of the site in Lompoc, which, at this point our requirement is 0.75 inch. And that, in some cases, has been difficult. So we will continue to make the argument that we don't think this is particularly feasible.
So basically, they're going to want you to percolate an amount of water well beyond what the soil would normally absorb if it were an undeveloped site.
That is quite possible that on individual sites that will happen, and our argument would be that at the maximum, that's what it should be. It should be what it originally could accept. And we think that their proposal will go well above that.
And one of the concerns from 2 engineers that I talked to is that given the location of the water table, which is about 60 feet below us, if we percolate that amount of water and then we have a nice fat earthquake, a little thing called liquefaction would recur and we'd probably all sink into the ground. And the other thing just that has been talked about, that you don't want to percolate that much water next to a structure because literally one side of the structure will start to settle. And that's why it's not a very good idea. And I think the other thing that's truly hideous is, let's assume you're a small business and you're going to repave your parking lot and you take the asphalt out and put new asphalt in. Now you tripped over that hazard. So now you can't repave, you have to overpave everything.
You would need to be very careful about what was pervious and impervious. And people can, go right up to that threshold. Then the requirements at 2,500 square feet are quite a bit lesser than when you hit the 5,000 square feet. So, in planning projects, you would want to look at how much impervious area you would be creating and see if there was a way to avoid it in order to avoid the full impact of the regulations. If you were looking, and I think that's part of their intent, to have you design it in such a way as not to have to necessarily, put a bunch of water in one place.
So if you put in pervious paving, which we know exists, and you percolated 1 inch out of that 3 inches, because that's about what you'd get in there before you ran out of reservoir room, where would you account for that other rain that you couldn't percolate through your pervious paving? What would be your alternatives?
Well,
and we've had this discussion, but I just want you to share it with the audience.
At this time, because Lompoc is required to infiltrate, and it depends on the amount of square footage. But if you're over 5,000, you can treat and release. The revision allows you to do some treat and release over 15,000, but somehow you're going to have to capture and contain it to either infiltrate it or treat and release. And then they also have some increased requirements for volume of water that would be treated and released. So, so it's all pretty convoluted. I think a lot of it's going to end up having to shake out as implementation goes into effect. It's going to be a long learning process, I think, for everybody.
Okay, and then could you just, for everybody, recap for a moment the unique position we are with having the ability to go to court over this because you did a good job in the beginning?
Okay. In the past, when the original regulations came down, the city filed a petition within the required 30 days to challenge those regulations. And those regulations are these that are being implemented now. So we still have a challenge pending, and there could potentially be another petition action within 30 days of this action, which the council could consider specific to these requirements.
The new improved requirements. Mm-hmm. So we're in a good position to protect ourselves. Anyone else have a question? Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. No question, but just thank you for the work and keep fighting. I think that this is something where, we can negotiate away some of these things. We just have to keep working at it. So thank you.
And next, our city administrator status report.
Honorable Mayor, City Council members, audience, and viewers, as noted on the agenda, I would take this opportunity to update publicly on the meeting, the special meeting of August 27th, Oversight Board to the successor agency of the dissolved Lompoc Redevelopment Agency. At its meeting of August 27th, which was scheduled specifically to reconsider the Oversight Board's August 20th decision regarding the Lompoc Theater building, as many are aware, the Oversight Board did not review that August 20th decision, a decision that prohibits the Lompoc successor agency from using money the agency has available to stabilize the Lompoc Theater building. That happened after over 2 hours of discussion during a meeting attended by about 100 members of the Lompoc community, and that non-action was the result of technical maneuvers based on rules of parliamentary procedure. In fact, if Oversight Board member Bob Lingle had not made the motion, seconded by Oversight Board member Brad Wilkie, to allow the public to comment on the theater, then the Oversight Board would not have even heard from the many members of the Lompoc community who took time away from their busy schedules to attend that meeting and wanted to speak. Ultimately, as a result of the August 20th 4-3 vote with Oversight Board members Lingle, Wilkie, and myself on the short end, the community is now faced with struggling to find alternative means to save the theater building before this upcoming winter. And so that is my summary. Thank you.
Well, having sat through the entire meeting, it was all about the money and it wasn't about anything else. They wanted the money and they had 4 votes and they got it. I think that's the long and the short of it. Okay, oral communications, your opportunity to come and talk to us about anything for 5 minutes. If it is about an item that's on the agenda and you can stay, please hold on. If you can't stay or the item's not on the agenda, come on down.
Good evening. My name is Johan Scarin. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. And I am here to congratulate Mayor Lynn on helping me complete the deal over on the Vons. We now have a national tenant who will be moving into the building here shortly. And it's going to be a huge improvement to that property. Going to create new jobs, new tax revenue. And I cannot say enough about Mayor Lynn. The man called me on Sundays at 7:30 in the morning. The guy loves his job. This is someone you don't want to lose. He really, really works. And he must obviously truly love what he does. I've worked with a number of mayors up and down the Central Coast, and you truly have a winner here, and you need to hang on to him. Also, Laura was very helpful in the beginning of this project and has seen it through. But I have to say, with Mayor Lynn's help and holding everybody's hand to the end here, it's been a great success, and I'd love to tell you who it is, but they've asked us not to say anything. But they are coming, and they have closed, and I don't have anything to do with it anymore. But I would still have property here in Lompoc, and I'm really looking forward to the changes. I know there's Grocery Outlet that's coming. I know the Marshalls is coming, and this is coming, and it's going to be a great thing for everybody here in the city. And I just want to thank you all again very much. Thanks.
You need to say which Vons before you get everybody nervous.
Sorry?
You didn't say which Vons, and I know, and you know, but they don't know.
Well, yes, the Vons is staying here, but the other Vons is on 1124 West Ocean next to the new Rick Dewey Senior Community Center, and it's going to be beautiful once it's finished. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a new national tenant going into the vacant building next to the Dewey Community Center on West Ocean, and escrow is closed. Who else? You guys are all sitting here? There you go.
Good evening. My name is Betsy Phelps, and I'm here to represent a Lompoc family who has an overwhelming but life-saving opportunity. His name is Jeremy Bryant. He's 15 years old, and he was born with congenital heart defect. Over the course of his life, up to this point, he's already had 5 operations. He's now 15 with a pacemaker. And this November, his family will be going back and forth to UCLA Medical Center. The doctors have narrowed down his heart condition from a valve issue to an electrical issue in his heart. And he may be facing possible donor list. So the family asked if I would represent them here tonight and just let you know that the cost of medical expense is only a part of the struggles that they face, that I feel that no family should face alone. So we are asking Lompoc community to help represent this family and let them know that we care. And that's all I have to say.
You need to tell us where a donation can be made.
Okay, thank you. We did have an account opened at Rabobank. It's under the name of Jeremy Bryant Medical Expense Account. I can also be contacted. My phone number is 741-7159. And I welcome any questions or advice in facing this. This is the first time I've ever represented someone.
And I think wasn't one of the things that they were most urgently in need of a defibrillator?
That is correct.
Because what's needed when there's another heart attack.
That's correct. His heart has had, he's had 2 strokes, and so for emergency needs, they would like to have a defibrillator.
Okay. So you did fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to us?
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name's Anne Rouget. Tonight I'm representing the Lompoc Public Library as the president of their Board of Trustees. We've been working, before I started, many years have been spent trying to build a children's library on the land donated by Charlotte Benton. It was about, I believe it's been going on for almost 8 years now. Our Library Board of Trustees is coming to the point where we realize it's not going to be financially feasible to build a structure on that lot. We've come up with some innovative ideas, and we want the public's input on how they feel about some of our ideas. We're going to have a public meeting, a special meeting, on Thursday, September 13th at in the Grossman Gallery at the library at 6 p.m. I gave each of you a flyer. We're going to be sending that out also to the schools in that area of town. The idea that Charlotte had was to serve the children on the south side of town. So we're trying to come up with some creative, innovative ideas on how to do that on our limited budget, and it's getting more limited as the time goes on. So we urge you all to come to this public meeting. We have 3 recommendations that we're going to consider, and we need the public's input on it. This was all started through the public, and a lot of money has been donated to the Library Foundation for this project. So it is the people's money, and it's a city project. So we would like you all to come. I'd like to see, I don't know if all 5 of you could come to our meeting, but I would like to have some of you in attendance and also hear the public input, because our Board of Trustees is really ready to move ahead with this. The time has gone on too long, and I know everyone, we either do it or get off the you-know-what. So anyway, any questions about that?
And would there be somewhere people could send a note or a comment? In our case, we can't all go, but we might like to send you a comment. And
well, you can send it to Molly Gerald
at
the city email address, or at the Lompoc Library. You could drop a note over at the library if you had some questions. The options we are considering is to suspend activity at all of it, and or go ahead and wait until we have money to go ahead with the original plan, or accept a donation of prefab building from Project Frog, a company out of San Francisco who has donated will donate a prefab building to us, which the city would have to put up the money for the infrastructure. So that's becoming financially difficult. I don't think we can do that. Our next creative idea was to purchase a custom bookmobile that would serve the children of that area and, you know, move around to the different schools and so on. So we need the public's input on what they think we should do, and maybe we can, I know we'll move ahead with this soon. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. You can come up here and do public comment and ask the question, or you can just sit down with her after and talk. I know she's happy to talk with you. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak to us now on any subject? Okay, seeing no one rise, we'll close oral communications and we'll come back for our consent calendar. We have the approval of 2 sets of minutes, August 7th and August 21st. We have the approval of expenditures, a payroll batch for $1,002,000, an expense voucher for $160,000, an expense voucher for $498,000, an expense voucher for $77,000, an expense voucher for $348,000, an electronic manual register for $724,000, and electronic payments for $13,000, manual payments for $711,000, and electronic register for $1,111,000. And these are all by batches, so that's why there's a bunch of them. I will be abstaining from check number 307861, made payable to Smitty's Towing for $1,783.75. Item number 3, award of the project number FY12LF-1, the landfill scale and solid waste yard paving project. So our old swayback scale won't be with us anymore. Item 4, adoption of resolution number 5807 sub 12, delegating authority to execute certain Caltrans documents to specific city officials. Are there any items on here that a council member would like to have pulled? Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. No, I would not like to pull any agenda items, but I want to say that I would be abstaining from the approval of the minutes from the meeting of September 21st, as I was not in attendance.
Okay, so let's take that item first. So first we'll do approval of the minutes of September 21st. Is there any discussion on that? Could we vote, please?
Wait, was there a second?
I'm sorry, and a second. Somebody's got to second me.
I'll second.
Okay. And could we vote, please? And that passes 4-0, 1 absent. Abstention? Yeah, all right. Keep an eye on me. And now, are there any other items on the consent calendar someone would like to have pulled? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So move.
And a second?
Second.
And is there any further discussion on the consent calendar? Seeing none, could we vote, please? That passes 5-0. And now we are down to appointments. And this is the appointment of commissioners to the Transmission Agency of Northern California.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, I believe it is appointment of an alternate commissioner. I will remain the commissioner.
No, this is the Transmission Agency, not the NCPA. This is another new entity.
It's been around for a while.
Oh, has it?
It's no. Transmission Agency is different.
Oh, okay. It would seem that makes sense to me if Councilmember Costa is willing that she's the alternate commissioner to the NCPA, that she should also be the alternate commissioner to the tank.
Mr. Mayor, in the past, Ron Stassi was the alternate commissioner.
Oh, it's the staff position. I got it. Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to recommend that we nominate Larry Bean
to the
Larry Bean and Brad Wilkie as alternate commissioners.
Okay, and a second?
I second.
And is there any discussion? Seeing none, could we vote, please? That passes 5-0. Okay, now we come to our public hearing item. Consideration of a Planning Commission recommendation regarding a change to subsection D of section 17.052.030, permitted uses in the Old Town Commercial District, OTC. The proposed change would address professional office use on Ocean Avenue and H Street in the Old Town Commercial District. A negative declaration has been prepared pursuant to the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry. No, I can't. It's right through this screen.
It's my new laptop. Sorry.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, due to financial interest in the downtown area, I must recuse myself from this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council members, the Planning Commission is recommending that the City Council receive and review the Planning Commission recommendation, hold the public hearing, and adopt the negative declaration for the text amendment, waive further reading, and introduce ordinance number 1587, parens 12, approving the text amendment 12-10. The background discussions are listed in your staff report. The short of it is the Economic Development Subcommittee and the Planning Commission met to discuss uses in the Old Town at the direction of the council. And one of the overriding comments that came through from the public and as a concern at the meeting was the restriction on office use at H and Ocean along those streets. So the recommendation as a result of this was to have the text amended at this time for a time period of 5 years. And at that time, it would be reviewed to see if it was impacting the development in the Old Town or if it was an appropriate restriction that is being lifted to allow economic development in the area and to clear some of the vacant spaces that we currently have in that area. And we are presenting to you the draft ordinance attached to your staff report, the adopted Planning Commission resolution, the Planning Commission staff report, which is the basis for their determination, and the minutes of the August 8th meeting where the Planning Commission did adopt their ordinance, or I'm sorry, their resolution. So that concludes my staff report, and I'm available for any questions.
One question, I think I'm comfortable with the answer, but let's assume someone goes into one of these offices and the 5-year period ends. They don't have to move out. They can stay. It would affect a future tenant if it were changed?
That would be correct, sir.
Okay. Anyone else with a question at this time? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open this for public comment. Who's here to talk about this? Nobody? Okay. How about everybody that's in favor of this, raise your hand. Okay, good. Okay, now we got that part.
Real good, Mayor and Council, Dwayne Homedale, City of Lompoc. I'm just calling to say that this is a 2-month turnaround. I think it's one of the fastest programs ever turned around in the city in a long time. So I'm glad to see it done. And this council sent it back to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission heard it and came back. I think it's about 2 months, no more than that. So congratulations.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone here who's opposed to this? We got all the in favor hands. Anybody opposed to this? Okay, so. All right, seeing no one else rise, we'll close oral communication and come back to the council. Is there any discussion at this time? Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I actually thought about this for a while. I was worried that this decision may have been short-sighted in the sense that we were just trying to fill the storefronts as fast as possible without really thinking through that you'd be filling spaces that could be used for other purposes. That said, I started doing some research in downtown areas, and there was a lot of information in regards to what constitutes a thriving downtown area. Of course, a lot of things that we know, the retail stores, various attractions, destination restaurants, the atmosphere. But one thing that they also talked about was this live-work situation and these live-work accommodations. And so I think that, you need to attract multiple people to a downtown to make it successful, including those that work in the office space. So my one concern is the 5 years, actually, so I wanted to get council's feedback. I think that we should approve this evening, but curious if maybe it says in the staff report that it was generally agreed that the concept should be reviewed in 5 years to assess the impact on the Old Town commercial, and I was curious what the argument was, either for or against that, or why they came up with 5 years.
5 years is the time of review in the Old Town specific plan. It's scheduled for a 5-year review, so that is where that 5-year came from.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other lights, I'd accept a motion.
Councilmember, I move that we accept staff recommendations.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that's 4-0 with 1 abstention. All right. Okay, before we begin item 9, we will take a 10-minute break. Just in case anyone's here for item number 8, that item is continued to September 18th. So if you're waiting for item number 8, wait no more. I should have said something at the beginning of the meeting. And now we'll take item number 7, a response to the 2011-2012 Santa Barbara County Civil Grand Jury Report entitled A Failure of Oversight, the Lompoc Housing and Community Development Corporation. Brad? And this is a follow-on from our last meeting.
Mayor, council members, this is a follow-up to last meeting's presentation. At the last meeting, there were several suggestions to be incorporated into the draft report to the county, the grand jury. Staff took down those items and have incorporated each one of those as best we can into the current version of the response to the grand jury. I'd like to read the main first sentence from the response that addresses some of the items that were brought up at the last meeting, and I'll just read it right from the report. The City Council acknowledges the Civil Grand Jury for the time and effort it has taken to review this important public matter. When nonprofit organizations are provided public monies by means of loans and grants for vital public services and purposes, how that public finance funding is distributed, used, and accounted for are critical to retaining the public's trust. The City Council regrets the inaction by Lompoc City Councils that have diminished the public trust. In light of this, and as a result of the very recent unfortunate situation regarding LHCDC, the Council is taking steps to improve its procedures to protect these expenditures and ensure that accountability. In fact, had the statutory requirements allotted for more time, this response could have provided more details about those improved procedures. What I'll do now is go back to the recommendations. Most of the items before the findings we didn't adjust from the last time. There were a couple of small items, but the bulk of the changes were made to the responding to the recommendations from the grand jury. In the response to recommendation 1B, which was the request was that the City Council establish a policy that the Management Services Director conduct an annual audit with time-certain deadlines of all organizations that receive city funds in excess of $50,000. There are 13 points that I added to the staff report, to the response to the grand jury, that addressed the items of concern from the last meeting. I won't go through all of them, but effectively, the main changes that were made are to the response. The City Council desires to establish a policy and to develop procedures to implement this recommendation. That's in contrast to what was provided last time, that basically questioned the overarching definition of what an organization is. With that in mind, the policy that will be presented in the future would apply to all nonprofit agencies that request or receive more than $50,000 in any single fiscal year, city fiscal year, and would also apply to any agency requesting and receiving any amount of money that has a budget in excess of $100,000. There are some definitions that point to what a nonprofit agency is and the timeframes for when their reporting to the city would become non-compliant, and also the fact that the cost of the audits would be the responsibility of the nonprofit that is applying for the funds. Organizations that are subject to this policy that do not respond to the city's requests to provide current financial statements, audited financial statements, will be reported to the City Council at the next meeting where they become non-compliant. And the City Council would have the recommendation is that the policy would have several avenues to take against a nonprofit organization that does not comply, which would include forfeiture of any remaining unpaid grants or funds, possible repayment of previously paid grant funds, the prohibition from applying or receiving funds from the city in the future, any other legal consequences that are available to the City Council, and any other consequences that are possibly outlined in a specific agreement between the city and the nonprofit organization. As requested, this would not apply to organizations that are providing services to the city as part of the city's ongoing operations, primarily for services rendered for things that are of value to the city. Probably a better way of saying that is through the normal procurement process. And finally, the policy shall provide for a funding mechanism in the city's biennial budget to support the additional resources necessary to carry out this budget policy by the Management Services Department. Recommendation 2B, which talks about that the results of this audit will be provided to the City Council. That's addressed in the 13 points I had just mentioned, and items 7, 10, and 11 address this specifically. I just reiterate those in the response so that each recommendation can stand on its own without having to refer back to any other items. Recommendation 3B does the same thing, where the recommendation is that the cost be borne by the entity that's requesting the funds. Items 3, 4, 5, 6, and 13 address that point. And finally, recommendation 4B speaks of withholding any funding from any organization that fails to supply complete records from an annual audit or has failed to meet the existing requirements of a contract. Points number 3, 4, 6, and 11 address this point. And that, in a nutshell, is what the changes were made to the recommended response to the grand jury based on the input from the City Council at the previous meeting.
Are there any questions at this time before I go to public comment? Councilmember Starbuck.
You know, since as a council we've went through this other than individually, and I think that it would really behoove us to look through each of these points that Mr. Wilkie's brought here and have a slight discussion on them, because I want to make sure that we're on the right path, and this response is going to go to the grand jury in, what, 2 days?
It's required in 2 days, yes.
In 2 days. So if I could get maybe the time, I feel we should very much invest our time right now and look at these replies, because these replies are what our policy is probably going to become based on.
And is your thought we would take them one at a time?
If that would be the easiest way.
I think so. So let's take a look at you know what, I'd like to go to public comment first, then we'll come back to this. And I'd like to hear what the public has to say before we start in on it. Is that okay with everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Who's here to speak to us on this subject?
Tom Jenkins from Good Samaritan Shelter, as president of Good Samaritan Board, and just listening to the recommendations, don't necessarily disagree with any of them, with the exception of a little bit of granularity on the cost of the audits will be borne by the agency requesting funds. As long as that can be included in the administrative cost that is usually built into any sort of contract, most agencies don't necessarily just have free funds they can use to just fund it. It's usually something that's part of your just administrative fees. But the way you've worded it is that you would not be able to include that in part of your administrative cost. Let's say it's 5% or 15% or whatever the case may be. We'd have to find some other funding to authorize that from some other source. And most nonprofits don't necessarily have an alternative source of funds, so it's just built into the cost of providing the service to an entity. Though it's possible in an agreement with any entity, we may say, okay, we'll bear that because it's part of our normal project, or that the project we're doing for the city or any other entity is too small to justify building it in. We'll just build it in some other fashion. So that's where I can see maybe a little bit of granularity that may be problematic with that wording.
Councilmember Starbuck.
So the statement then that the agency will bear the cost would not be true. It would still be the CDBG or the RDA or the whoever would still bear the cost then for the nonprofit.
No, not necessarily, but that cost may be built into an administrative cost within any
within the redevelopment, or I should say within a nonprofit. So then it would still be borne by the nonprofit, then, not by the city.
Not necessarily. I'm just saying is what you're saying is that there is no other option, and that if I have it built, let's say I provide administrative cost to you. We're going to provide $100,000 worth of services, and part of that is 5% administration for the nonprofit, and part of that 5% administration for our nonprofit is our audit process. If you're saying I can't include that, then I have to then take the audit and put it somewhere else and put that audit for that project on someone else or some other entity. It'd be similar to saying the city can't charge the citizens for doing their own internal audit. You have to find some other source of funds for it.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilmember Lingle.
Mr. Jenkins, and we'll, as we go through this point by point, we'll discuss that, but just let you know that was my intention when I made that recommendation, that the nonprofit would be responsible for the cost of the audits, and it would be, if we gave you $100,000, realizing part of that $100,000 would be to provide us with financial audits.
Yeah.
So it'd be, yeah, that was my,
and that would be fully within
that was I didn't say it, but that was my intent when I made that motion. So we can discuss it when we discuss it point by point, though.
Thank you. Who's next?
Pat Brady, Good Samaritan. Mayor and fellow councilmen, I have a question. It's probably just clarification for me. But as Mr. Wilkie was talking, he was talking about that the city would do an audit of nonprofits who asked or received more than $50,000 or that their budget was more than $100,000 a year. Correct?
We would require an audit.
Okay.
We wouldn't perform it, and you would.
Fine. Okay. That we would perform it. So that was where my point of clarification was. If we, as a nonprofit, on a regular basis, every year, we have our books audited.
Yes.
That would suffice.
Yes.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
Normal and customary audit.
As long as it was somebody different doing the audit.
It's a third party.
Yeah, third.
Yeah, third party. Next.
Pam Wall, local resident, Mayor, Council. I have a problem with this because of what Linda Wortman had said in the last meeting. It's continuing to blame the City Council, now, prior, whatever. And it's my understanding her reports went to Council, and I don't know that any came from Dinah. I didn't see anything. Mostly it was the RDA, and that's why we know we have a problem, because there were reports. But again, it goes back to not having a policy. I know you're going to discuss this here, but are we creating a formal policy here tonight by the response to this report? I don't know how you can put it in there as though it's a done deal when no policy has ever been established.
I think what Mr. Wilkie was saying is because of the very short time frame in the process we have to go through to create a formal policy, we can't possibly do that in the grand jury's time frame. What we're doing here tonight is we're setting these steps, and these are the steps that will be used in creating the policy that will come back to us in the very near future, because it's in the form of a resolution. So we have to kind of decide what we want, and the staff will write the resolution. The resolution will come back to us for approval.
It sounds as though it's a policy now, the way it's written. But I have another question. While we're discussing compliance reports and audits and all that kind of thing, we're discussing for the future. But what about the current compliance reports? And again, I'm going to go back to Casa Contras. The bank has had it now for a year. Don't they have a compliance report due? That's under covenant. And who's monitoring that? Because they're still paying the same rents.
There is a report that comes to the city from the receiver that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of the steps after that. I would be happy to find out for you.
Is that made public? And why not?
A little above my pay grade, but I can find that out for you too. It comes to me as a confidential document, so the answer is no, it's not something I would be able to give out.
Okay, then you'll report whether or not they're in compliance and reducing their rents?
The document does not cover those issues. I would be happy to investigate this for you, but again, I don't have that answer.
But isn't that part of the compliance report?
I'm sorry, I don't have that answer for you.
Can you get that?
You betcha. I got the answer from our conversation of 2 weeks ago today, but it's, as I told you, it's pretty thick, so it's...
Okay, I'm going to stay on this.
It's okay.
All right.
I'm not going away.
Okay, neither am I.
Good
Thank
things.
you.
Good things. Who else would like to speak to us? Last chance. Going. One more. Okay.
Yedidia DeVries. I just have three sort of clarification questions, I guess. Given that this is not the adoption of a policy, right, all that is being discussed is the response to the grand jury. My first question is, has there been a formal council request to staff to actually draft policy language and agendize a discussion? And my second question then is, when is that going to take place? I ask this particularly given, as Mr. Holmdale earlier noted, the adoption of language with regard to Old Town within 2 months was uniquely and incredibly fast. And this report, the response to the grand jury also notes that the next opportunity to fund this recommendation would be for the 2013-2015 budgets, and that planning for the 2013-2015 budget is scheduled to start in October. And so I would hope that we'd be able to get that done before that. And then my last question is, will that discussion only address the policy as outlined in this response, or will it also include discussion of outreach and potential assistance to those affected by LACDC's failure, since that is, I understand, not required as part of the formal response to the grand jury, but if we're trying to take responsibility for this, clearly that too is an important aspect. So I would hope that the discussion of policy would go beyond what is outlined here to include some sort of outreach and assistance to those who have been affected by the failure. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we'll come around to those questions of timing here in just a minute. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this? Okay, last chance. Okay. Close oral communication. We'll come back to council. Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to quickly answer the question from the last speaker, yes, I did request an official policy to be drafted back in October 2011. It's been almost a year, and we still do not have it on the agenda. And I don't have any draft for that policy. I only have some bullet points that are part of a report that is going out to the grand jury. Those bullet points will be discussed tonight. I don't know if they're part of a formal policy or not. That remains to be seen tonight, so stay tuned. I'd like to take on the recommendation that Councilmember Starbuck made and start going through this document. And my suggestion would be, let's start on page 1 and move on. We have 14, how many pages do we have? We have, by the way, the document is 14 pages long, which I think is a bit long. I would much appreciate something a little bit further concise, but if the council allows me, I would like to start on page 1.
Any objection to that?
Are you going to start by the inactions line?
About the inaction, yes. There is this sentence that says the City Council regrets inactions by Lompoc City Councils that have diminished the public trust. The City Council regrets inactions by Lompoc City Councils that have diminished the public trust. I find that sentence misleading. I think the City Council has regrets to have caused public mistrust, but the actions of the City Council are not the only actions that have led to public mistrust. For example, in my recollection of having received reports from the staff, I can only tell you that RDA, the RDA reports, reported non-compliance issues. It was only until 2011 that I ever saw a report from CDBG that says that there was a compliance issue. Having said that, why do we say that it's only the City Council, the one that is causing public mistrust? We have a problem here. The problem is that the staff, some members of the staff of the City of Lompoc, did not do their part of their job, which was to report the non-compliance issues. The grand jury report has over 60 citations. I did not receive those 60 examples from the city staff. I received them from the grand jury. That's when I learned. In fact, I learned from a public speaker that Casa Don Tres over they are charging excessive amount of rents. The staff never told me that. That's by far a non-compliance issue. The staff didn't record it. The staff didn't tell the council that Casa Contrast was overcharging their tenants. A public member told us 2 weeks ago. The county has the obligation to do a lot of this compliance and maintenance. Why are we saying that it's only the City Council, past, future, present? I think we need to add, for one, I would take that sentence out, but if you want to leave it, we need to say the staff failed to alert council members of certain compliance issues, and the county of Santa Barbara failed to report non-compliance issues. If we want to be complete and accurate, we cannot just blame the city council. Yes, the city council, the Lompoc City Council is at fault, previous and present and futures maybe, if we don't establish a policy in place, but there are other entities. So again, I think we need, if we're going to go and be really accurate with what we say, we need to add staff and the county. I don't want to absolve them. I think they were as much at fault as the Lompoc City Council.
Ms. Martner, if I may.
Yep.
And don't take this wrong way, but if we have 14 pages, if we go this long on one point, but what if we make this recommendation? The City Council regrets inactions by the City of Lompoc that have diminished public trust. If we just incorporate the entire City of Lompoc and not just say council and just not say staff, but the failure of the city, would that suffice?
I also think that the county needs to be held accountable.
This is the city's response.
I think
we can incorporate those words if we want.
I am suggesting
the City of
that we
Lompoc,
do.
County of Santa Barbara. We could say the City of Lompoc and the County of Santa Barbara that have diminished public trust. Would that work?
What does the rest of the council think?
Sure.
Okay.
Works for me.
So it'd be the City Council regrets inactions by the City of Lompoc and the County of Santa Barbara that have diminished public trust.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Starbuck.
Still wordy for me.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it should be a one paragraph. Council regrets past action by, itself and staff. We are currently developing a policy upon completion that we will forward this policy to the grand jury, period.
I think we might need a few more facts. Anything else on page 1?
Nope.
Anything on page 2 of 14? Councilmember Lingle, is your light still on? Or yeah, okay.
I always have something to say.
Yeah. Anything on 2 of 14? 3 of 14? Councilmember Martner.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where are we? Page?
Well, we're on either 2 or 3, depending on if someone has something.
Page 2, I have some small comments, but I will omit.
Page 3? 3 of 14, anything there? Okay, 4 of 14. Five of 14. Six of 14. Seven of 14.
I have a comment regarding page 7 of 14. Down at the bottom, page 5, paragraph 3, early signs of compliance trouble. Reported statement, consequences did not follow. The city responds, although unrelating to lending projects, the Human Services Commission withheld funding to LHCDC for eligible. What does that have to do with consequences did not follow? That the Human Services Commission withheld funding to LHCDC is not relating. It's not related to lending. So what about if we just bring a specific example that consequences did not follow? For example, the overriding of, the overcharging of rents. There were no consequences that were followed. That's an example. I don't know why we choose not to say it.
I think the reason this example is in here is there was an action by the council on the recommendation of the Human Services Commission that anyone who was not in compliance, any covenant with the city, could not continue to receive city funds, and that's why this is included.
But those consequences were not a direct cause. Those consequences were not of the non-compliance. The consequences did not follow meant if the building is not being maintained, what consequences did the city implement? Well, they told the Human Service Commission not to give them any more money. The consequences did not follow basically says, how did we correct the situation? We are implying that the way we corrected the situation was to tell the Human Services Commission to withhold funding. That's not correcting the problem. I mean, you know, the problem is like make that agency fix the building. That's what I think consequences did not follow mean. So again, I think it's very vague. I think this whole thing with the Human Services Commission has been mentioned here 4 or 5 times as if that was the only thing we ever did. And that is true. That's the only thing that we ever did to try to correct the problem. And that was very small. So why do we keep bringing it up? So again, I find it that it's not the proper city response. The proper city response would be, there were no consequences, unfortunately. We did not make LACDC fix the properties.
I believe with regard to a number of their properties that there were code enforcement efforts moving forward. I don't think they were necessarily successful, but we were going through the steps.
Well, believe it's okay. I would like if there was an effort from code enforcement and if there was an action taken from the city, that action needs to be reported. This is going to the grand jury. This is not, I believe that we sent somebody out there and told LACDC fix the window. To my knowledge, the only reports that I've seen came out of RDA. I haven't seen CDBG reports that state that we went to these properties and made them clear the weeds, fix the plumbing, do whatever it is that needed to be done. The consequences did not follow. That's an accurate statement that the grand jury made. The city is responding in a sideways. I think it needs to be taken out. I think it's unprofessional and it's an insult to the grand jury to tell them, we just established a policy that we're not going to give them any more money. But we still have tenants with no heat. We still have tenants with no windows. We still have tenants that are being overcharged rent.
Okay. I am absolutely certain, because I have received copies of code enforcement complaints, as has everyone on the council, that code enforcement efforts were taken. I could not tell you against how many properties and in what time frame those occurred. But I am absolutely certain that we did that. If it was adequate or timely, no, I do not. But to say we did not do something is an incorrect statement.
And to not put it, if we did something, let's put it in here. Come on, let's change that answer. And if we made steps to correct the situation, and we did have consequences that follow, let's put them in here, because that's what this report is about, is to answer these questions. So, Mr. Mayor, if you know, please, let's direct the staff to write that in here.
Seems reasonable. And I also believe that Mrs. Wortman conducted periodic reviews of the properties, wrote correction reports, then at least through some period of time, those corrections were made. However, my recollection is that down toward the end, the corrections were not made. So would we empower the staff to add a couple sentences outside of this meeting to describe those things that we did?
I would like the staff to draft those sentences here and perhaps bring it toward the end of this discussion, at least a draft sentence that states the fact that the city did make efforts of compliance and perhaps provide a date and an address as to where that was made, because we need factual information. Grand jury deserves factual information.
I don't think we could have those dates and addresses tonight because it would require a search. I think we could draft a sentence and have those inserted tomorrow when Steve can get in the computer and look at the ones that he did. Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, well, I just want to kind of digress on the same line there on 7 where it says early signs of compliance trouble. We never address in the, our our response, the report statement is consequences did not follow, and then we responded with Human Services Commission. We're talking about $20,000 with the Human Services Commission, and I'm sure that they were the last one to know. I don't think the 5 people got together, went someplace, and said, oh, wow, they're out of compliance. Somebody on staff told them. This is part of the early signs of compliance trouble that I think we should address in this.
And I'm sorry, you lost me. Which paragraph are you addressing?
The one we were just talking about, page 7 of 14, paragraph 5, or page 5, paragraph 3.
Page 7, paragraph 3. Yes. Okay. Got it.
I'm using my new little computer, too.
Good for you. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. It's called a tablet. Tablet.
I'm learning.
Staff, do you have any recommendations of how we could better address this concern? Mr. Wilkie or Ms. Gallivan?
How about if we give them a minute to work on that, and I'll put a tab on that, and we'll go forward a little bit so they can draft something.
Well, we can go ahead and draft something, but Mayor, you're accurate in that we would like to consult with Steve Boggs about the code enforcement cases and the previous actions, and to have dates and the facts represented to put into this document. So we can look those up and prepare them for tomorrow to be added. The consequences, what the interpretation here was that there, as a result, these policies did get put in place by Human Services. So what I see both points. I just wanted to clarify that was as a consequence, as a result, this policy was put in place and funding was denied because they were not compliant. Point being taken to add other actions as well.
And that was, as I recall, principally as a result of Linda Wertman's effort with regard to her compliance reports for the housing stock. I think that's what drove that forward, if I remember correctly. That's what drove that compliance, non-compliance question forward to the Human Services Commission.
To clarify, do we want to leave the existing language and add the language you're suggesting, or do you want to delete?
No, I would say, in my opinion, this needs to stay, because although it was sort of in the final hour, it still did take place.
Yeah, I think we need to incorporate all three.
It's not a consequence.
Probably list the code section, code enforcement, and then the RDA efforts at compliance, and then this was the last thing, so that would be the third in line.
Mayor Lynn, my one suggestion for staff, as well as it says that the Human Services Commission withheld funding to LHCDC, can we at least put the year, if not the month and the year, so that way they can see that this took place recently and wasn't something that happened a while ago?
Good suggestion.
Certainly, and that policy was adopted in 2010.
Okay.
Councilmember Starbuck?
Sorry, my apologies. Is that when the action took place as well?
Yes.
I would just, if you could just confirm that, add that date, I'd appreciate that. And then, Marilyn, I do have something else, but I can.
Go ahead.
At the end of that paragraph, although it does go on to page 8, I was just curious what the council thought of the final report being brought to the city council by the consultant, as well as our official policy when we complete it, if that should be forwarded to the grand jury upon completion as well. Because if we believe it should, then I think that sentence could be added to the bottom of that paragraph where it says results from the report will assist city staff to finalize a draft policy for council's review. Then I would say this final report and policy will be forwarded to the grand jury upon completion.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay, we got 5 nods on that. Okay, I'm sorry, Councilmember Starbuck, I think you were.
I'd like to go back to page 5 of 14.
No, you don't get to go back.
Yes, I do. And under page 4, paragraph 1, Lompoc Redevelopment Agency Enforcement, the very last paragraph, city response, the redevelopment agency's covenants were not the same as those monitored under the home program. I think that we should have language in this, and part of our policy should also entail that we will monitor the strictest covenant of the loan on the property or the money. We're just saying here the redevelopment agency's covenants were not the same as those monitored under the home program. If we have something more strict, we should monitor that. If we have two that are different, they should both be monitored. You have to maintain the compliancy of these covenants that are there, and we just gave an excuse here, basically, and not what we intend to do.
I agree, Councilmember Starbuck. Just saying that, these two covenants are different doesn't really address the problem. The problem is the enforcement of those covenants. And as it was stated, the logical thing is to comply with the one that is the strictest, and therefore you comply with all the others. So to put a statement saying that the City Council of Lompoc is drafting a policy where they will make sure that the strictest covenants are the ones that are enforced and complied with.
Mayor Lynn, we may have not a disagreement, but maybe some kind of misunderstanding. I guess the way that I'm seeing this is not in agreement with the other council members. And staff, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm seeing the first part as corrections and sort of the very basic responses to the facts, and then the second part of this letter addresses where we go from there. So if council wants to integrate the two things, we can do that, but I do think that we address that where we say that this is something that will be considered as a policy. Am I misunderstanding that? It just seems like there may be some confusion as to what information should go where within the report.
That is correct. In the recommendations is the only place where we're talking about the policy considerations that the grand jury has requested. And the first several pages are clarifications of statements made by the grand jury.
So again, if council is more comfortable with integrating, that's fine with me. I just want to make sure that, I would hate, if you want to repeat, we can do that too. I just want us to be clear how the formatting was. Thank you.
Yeah, I was under the same impression you were. I don't know who was next.
Well, I was just going to say there's 12 grand jurors and 5 of us, and if we're confused, think how they're going to be.
Okay. Yeah, Councilman Martin.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're getting into a big problem here because we're actually drafting a policy. It appears to be that, this is what we're going to do. This is really not the proper way to draft a policy when we are discussing a response to the grand jury. So we're convoluting the problem. I think the policy should be a separate agenda item where there is a draft that is presented by the council discusses the policy and then takes things in, adds things on, and then adopts the policy. Now we're trying to respond to the grand jury by saying, yeah, we're going to do this policy, but we don't really know what the policy is. We just kind of throw you a few things there. We're really going the wrong way about it. So I think I'm starting to think that anything related to the policy has to be taken out until the policy is discussed, until the policy gets public comment, until the policy is adopted in a resolution. Isn't that how we draft policies in the government?
Mayor Lynn.
Councilman Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I was under the impression that I'm going to disagree with you a little bit in that I think that this is okay to begin the process. So I think that the recommendations from the grand jury we probably wouldn't have included if they didn't suggest them in the first place. So I think that this is sort of going to be some basic information that will then come back to us in a council agenda item for further discussion, definitely a lot of elaboration, I'm sure, and things like that. I think that, and that's why I wanted to add that sentence that this final report and policy will be forwarded to the grand jury upon completion, so that we're telling them that this is really the beginning of the process. Once it comes back to council, we're done with it, we will forward that to them as well. And I think the only reason we're doing it that way is because of that 90-day requirement for the grand jury report response. Am I correct in that?
Yes. Could you repeat that?
What's that?
Could you run that by again real?
Did it come out too quickly? Oh. My argument would be that the responses that have been formulated by staff in regards to the responses to the grand jury about any kind of policy will really be the base that will be brought back to council to be elaborated upon and built upon at a future date, hopefully the next council meeting, if not very soon thereafter. to be discussed and elaborated upon. And then once that's adopted, that's why I wanted to add that sentence on page 8 of 14 that says this final report and policy will be forwarded to the grand jury upon completion. So they understand that this is really only the beginning of a process of creating a policy for the city, and it will be forwarded when it's completed. And again, I say that the only reason we're doing it in this manner is because of the 90-day requirement the grand jury puts upon the city to respond in that time frame.
Yes. So next, page 8 of 14, anything on there? And then we're going to get to 9 of 14, which is the meat and potatoes.
Just the sentence that I requested earlier.
Yeah, we agreed to that. Councilmember
Martner? Finding number 1, LHCDC loan agreements gave Santa Barbara County as the lead entity in the HUD Home Consortium authority to require audits and inspect the organization's records. The city responds, this doesn't apply to us. Well, it does apply to us. Regulations are regulations. So the regulations of home and any other federal agency or state agency that is giving us money, we just basically have to say, yes, we agree with finding 1. Why do we have to say that it doesn't apply to us? I mean, finding 1 basically says that the loan agreements gave Santa Barbara County as the lead entity in the HUD Home Consortium authority to require audits and inspects the organization records. That's a true statement. Why don't we say we agree? Why do we say that it doesn't apply? It applies. It's just a statement of fact. I don't understand why we answer this way. It really, it's just like a huge paragraph. Just say, we agree with finding 1. Yes, the County of Santa Barbara had, the authority to do audits and inspect the organization's records. Yes. Finding 1 is correct. I would say yes, finding 1 is correct. Done. As opposed to have that whole sentence in there. I don't know why it was there.
I don't know why they asked us about finding 1 when it had to do with the county and not us. That was my confusion. I thought the response was appropriate because we were telling them, yeah, you're right, it's not us. I don't even know why they asked us the question, frankly.
No, but the finding is that the Santa Barbara County as the lead entity in the HUD Home Consortium had the authority to require audits and inspect the organization's records. That is a fact. It has nothing to do with the city of Lompoc. It has to do with the County of Santa Barbara. Their finding is correct.
I understand that, but
so why don't we just say the finding is correct? Be done with.
Because they asked us to respond to it,
and we just say, yes, you're right. Grand jury, you are right. The finding is correct. The Santa Barbara County had the authority to inspect this organization. They are correct. City of Lompoc, we respond to you and we say we are correct. Your finding 1 is an accurate statement. And leave it at that.
City Attorney, would you love to weigh in on this? All right, well, since you're getting paid by the hour, you're stuck.
The reason that it's worded the way it is because in my review of the penal code requirements in having to respond to findings, it was written this way because it really it wasn't directed toward the city of Lompoc. It wasn't a finding directed toward the city of Lompoc. So we were saying it wasn't directed to us, so we're not going to respond. That's why we said what we said. You can determine that you want to respond, and you can make the response whatever you want it to be.
I think what Councilmember Martner is looking for is a little shorter phrase. So maybe that's what we want to say.
If the council wants to say the finding was correct, you can direct staff to say the finding was correct.
No, I was thinking of what you had just said a moment ago. It wasn't our problem, and therefore we're not responding. Sorry, you don't remember what you said. Whichever one of you was next.
Mr. Mayor, I have no problems with the city's response on this one. I mean, I think there was some thought put into it. Both of them say that it wasn't the city's responsibility. The city's not responsible. I think it says it may be a little bit too wordy for some, but the response is there, and I have no problem with it.
Your light disappeared. Yeah, you don't want to talk? Okay. All right, well, I'm comfortable with the wording here. Councilmember Costa, how do you feel?
I have a question, but I don't know if we have the answer to that question, so hopefully it doesn't make it a little bit more confusing. In the Board of Supervisors' response to the grand jury, anything in regards to the city of Lompoc, what was the county's response? Did they agree with the findings, or did they say it's not appropriate for us to respond?
Well, finding 1 and finding 2 were applicable to both of us. And then in the recommendations, there were separate recommendations for the county and the city. So they did not answer any of recommendations 1B, 1C, 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B. They had 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A. So there was no request by the grand jury to have the county answer for something that is our responsibility.
So I would just say the city's response should be that although the city of Lompoc agrees with finding 1, comma, the grand jury report requires the city of Lompoc, or you know what I mean, add that sentence in somewhere, keep the rest of it. I'm fine with it that way. Does that make sense?
Are we talking about using these recommendations?
No, he's talking about just adding a little bit of verbiage to this one over here.
Okay, now what was the verbiage? Because I'm staying behind on that.
Something that although the city of Lompoc agrees with finding 1, and then continue. Right, and then go on with the fact that a response is not appropriate because it's not applicable to the city.
I'm okay with that.
Bob, did you nod up and down? Okay. Ashley? Yes. Cecilia? Okay. Moving right along. 8 of 14, anything prior to item 1, prior to item 1. Just want to take those individually.
Item 1.
No. Okay, back on 8 of 14. Anything on finding 2 on 8 of 14? Nope. Okay. Now, recommendation 1B and everything down to number 1, it applies. So anything in those upper paragraphs that we want to address. Principal thoughts are a grant in excess of $50,000 or an annual budget in excess of $100,000. And I think to the questions asked by Tom and Pat, we need to have some clarification with regard to how they would pay for their audit, wherever that falls in all of this. I think that's down in the individual recommendations, though, isn't it?
Well, one issue that is going on here is that I don't really think we need to be specific with those 13 points. I mean, really all we need to say that on August 21, the council voted to establish this new policy on audits. Why do we need, I mean, unless we want to discuss individually those 13 points and agree and get 3 votes in every single one of points. At this point in time, I don't think we need to be that specific. We need to tell them that we voted on August 21 on a new policy, which was a result of this grand jury report. And the audit is actually explained in the beginning. But to go with a very detailed of 13 points, which if you're ready to do that tonight, we can go over to the 13 points and see if we agree with them. But do we need to have them in there?
Yes, I believe we do. I think
Okay,
we need to be
so
very
let's
specific.
go one by one.
That's why I want to do everything above there first. Is there anything above item number 1 anyone wants to address? Councilmember Martiner? Okay. All right. Going to item number 1. Applies to all nonprofit agencies that request to receive more than $50,000 in any single city fiscal year or have annual budgets of $100,000 or more. And then it describes the city's fiscal year. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. My apologies. The paragraph before item 1, although I know I already asked to include that the policy will be forwarded to the grand jury after its completion, it seems like we may want to restate that very quickly here, because it says, had the statutory requirement time frame for responding to this report allotted more time, this response could have provided more details about those improved procedures. So just give some allusion to the fact that we'll be sending off, when we have more time after we've submitted this, that we'll be sending off the final policy for the grand jury's review as well.
So we'll reiterate it here.
Reiterate, please. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, back to number 1. Any comments on number 1? So the concept of the receipt of more than $50,000 in any single year from all city sources or an organization with an annual budget of $100,000 or more. Everybody good with that? Everybody nodding? Okay, got 5 nods. Number 2, a nonprofit organization is defined as an agency that has received an exemption under sections 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Service Code, or as a private foundation as defined by section 509 of the Internal Revenue Service Code. Everybody good with that one? It defines who we're talking about. Okay. Item number 3, a nonprofit organization is required to submit current audited financial statements to the city in conjunction with their application for funds. The date of the audited financial statement shall be within 21 months of the date of the application for funds. 9 months are allowed to complete an audit per the Office of Management and Budget, OMB 133, and the audit would be current for 12 months after issuance, resulting in a total of 21 months. Everybody good with that one? Councilmember Martner.
Yeah, it's a question to the staff. Where does these guidelines come from?
The Office of Management and Budget has regulations about how single audits are reported to the federal government, and those apply to the city. So I just suggested that we use the same criteria to apply to our single audit requirements to the nonprofits, which allow for the 9 months of completion.
Okay, so these requirements are basically federal standards.
Correct.
For cities. So I guess the question is that an appropriate thing to apply to nonprofits?
It's applicable to any entities that get federal grant funding.
Okay, not just governments. Okay, so it's basically by default it goes to nonprofits.
Nonprofits and governmental entities.
So this is already in place.
For entities that are required to file a single audit under those guidelines, correct?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Everybody good with that? Yep. Okay. All nods. Audits shall be conducted by an independent auditor qualified to conduct audits for nonprofit organizations. All good? Okay. Number 5, the financial cost of audits shall be borne by the organization requesting funds from the city. Organizations otherwise subject to this policy that receive funds in the past and continue to be subject to the policy in the future that have agreements that do not require submission of an annual audits will be required to complete audits according to this policy at their cost. And Mr. Wilkie, I think to the point made by Mr. Jenkins and Ms. Brady, just a little bit of qualifying language in there that this is part of their normal cost of doing business. So it's within their normal administrative cost structure.
I believe the second speaker asked if an already existing audit would qualify, and I can put that clarification in here because I was fully expecting that entities that already do an audit, that we would be able to rely on that audit that they have already contracted for.
as long as they meet the criteria that are here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. But I think the other question was, and Tom might be able to readdress it, is there's two ways of reading this, and one of the ways that I could read this is that none of the funds they received from us could be used to conduct this audit, even though some small percentage of the audit would typically be paid for. If we were 5% of their funding and 5% of their overhead, then by default we would be paying for 5% of the audit. That makes sense? In other words, they're going to charge us a certain percentage of their overhead, and the audit is part of that overhead. And his concern is that they would not be able to do that. Am I getting it right, Tom?
That's my general concern. Is eventually we would have to pass the cost of all City of Lompoc audits on to other entities elsewhere.
Right. And typically the cost of an audit for because you guys have audits, it's divided. It's in your administrative cost, and every organization that you contract with, in effect, shares some small percentage of it. That's correct. But then also maybe we could have a program that's substantial enough that you would want a separate audit of that program itself, in which case we might have a separate line item in that project budget for an audit, just to make sure it gets done, and we would set that dollar figure aside to make sure it does get done, depending on the contract we would have with the city. Can you craft some language to solve that problem? Not necessarily at this instant, but can you include something that would clarify that?
I think it's something we can address. It may not necessarily be something we need to address here, because this is just the major concepts. The implementation and the setting up the procedures are going to be part of the policy that's going to be coming back to you, and that policy and the procedures that go along with that policy should be a lot more defined in the policy than it is here. So,
okay.
I understand the concerns, and the point was to have the audit paid for by the organization. If they pay out of funds that they're getting, that they have already gotten, that's an organizational decision on the part of the entity that received the funds.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tom. Everybody good with that, number 5? Bob? No, I'm sorry, Bob. I couldn't see you.
That's okay. I agree with it, number 5. This addresses Councilmember Martin's concern, is that we're trying to draft a policy here, which we aren't. But this portion will be part of the policy. And that's, I think, just conceptually, we want to let staff know that it is okay that it becomes part of the organizational operational funds, but let them draft it into the policy.
Okay, number 6, the organization shall provide the city with audited financial statements for all reporting periods in which city funds were expended, and the annual dollar amounts continue to exceed the levels mentioned in paragraph 1 above. So it goes forward in the future that you have to provide an audit for a period when you got money, even if you're not still getting money. Everybody good with that? Okay. Number 7, the Management Services Department will provide an annual report to the City Council regarding all organizations that fall within the scope of this policy, and shall identify all organizations that have complied with the policy. I think I would change that to have or have not complied with the policy. Fix that.
Marilyn?
Sir?
This was specifically identified so that we can have a single report to the council on an annual basis. The next 5 items talk about when somebody falls out of compliance,
right,
that we have a specific timeline for them, because that could happen anytime during the year.
Correct.
So once the notification and requests to the organization have failed to result in the production of an audit, that would be brought to you at the next available meeting. So,
correct. I think what we want here is we want a single report we can see everybody on, that no one gets lost in the weeds. So,
Marilyn, that may mean it's not just compliant or non-compliant, but it could be compliant, first notice, second notice, non-compliant. You know what I mean? There could be multiple options, but I would want to see everybody on the annual report. And then you can say, in addition to this annual report, and then the rest of the bullet points. That's how I would see it.
Yep. Number 8, organizations will be provided a courtesy first notice by the city if current audited financial statements are not received by the city 30 days prior to the date due of the agency's annual financial report. So 30 days prior, they're going to get a reminder. I think that's a good thing because we all forget things. Everybody good with that? Okay. Number 9, organizations that fail to respond to provide current and audited financial statements within 9 months following the end of the fiscal year will be provided a second notice to comply. The second notice will include a final due date and will include language that the organization's deficient status will be reported to the City Council if a response is not received within 30 days. So there's a date certain for responses. That's a good thing. Everybody good with that? Nods on the left. Basically, if they don't turn their stuff in, they get a 30-day notice, and then it comes to the council if they don't respond within that 30-day notice. So they get a note 30 days before that says, hey, you need to get it done, and then they get a note the day it's due if they haven't turned it in, and then 30 days after that it comes to us. Number 10, organization. Correct. It comes to the council within 30 days after the due date.
And it comes to
So that would actually be 11 months before the council would be notified.
It would be 10. Would be on the
30.
No, 30 days before they get the reminder. Then the day it's due, they get a reminder they didn't turn it in, and then 30 days after the notice, it comes to us.
They don't get it 30 days before.
Yeah, they do. They get a 30-day courtesy notice. That's what number 8 is.
1 month.
before it's due.
Before it's due.
As a reminder that it's due in 30 days. But
Says
my
are
confusion.
not received.
Which one are you reading?
I went back one. I'm reading it wrong, I guess.
Okay.
You know, one of the issues that I have with this is that, well, it comes up to the council, and then what? I mean, that's not a policy. If they're going to be late in their audits, and if they're not going to present it, the staff is going to say, council, this organization is not bringing their audits.
Number 11 has consequences.
Okay.
I think that those will be the actions. I'm under the impression that those would be the actions we would take.
So, and the council will have to take those actions?
Yes.
The council would recommend actions at that point.
Okay, so let's.
But shouldn't it just be more administrative and said, you know, these are the consequences? Why does it have to be a council action? That's what I'm asking, and I would like to get some input. Why it has to be there a council action as opposed to just having a policy that states if you don't follow this, these are the consequences and these are the actions. Because you might be filling agenda items and, you know, and I just, you know, to me feels that, you know, compliance with contracts are fairly straightforward if the policy is written such as that it doesn't require, you know, council discussion. It's part of the policy making. We're discussing the policy. Is that a good idea?
Mr. Martin, I think it is. The reason I think it is we've complained.
You said Mr.
I said Ms. Martin. I think it is a good idea because we've complained that this was not brought before the council in a timely manner. Now it is going to be brought before the council in a timely manner, and we have the option then to make recommendations, to listen to staff recommendations. But this is going to ensure us that it is brought before us in a timely manner.
Councilmember Costa is next.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. I would just add two arguments to that. The first would be transparency. So I think that when it's happening at the staff level, the council can then say, well, staff did or did not do this, or then the agency can say that, whereas when it's here, it's on the dais, it's in the public, everybody sees the way it's happening. And also, I think that's actually a consequence, you know, that's a further deterrent for them to want to make sure that they get their financial statements in on time, knowing that it will come to council, it will be in the public for discussion. You know, this nonprofit's going to be, you know, discussed in public and maybe a not so positive manner if they don't submit this information. So I would hope that would be a further deterrent to ensure that they follow the compliance with their audits.
I agree.
I would like to make a final comment on this. One of the reasons why I requested a policy regarding these compliance issues was to actually remove the politics, and I'll be very frank, remove the politics out of the process. It's been rumored 1,000 times that LHCDC had the support of the elected officials and that the elected officials looked the other way. And they kept on being given more allowances and more time and so forth. I came up with the idea of a policy that would prevent that from happening. But this here is not preventing that from happening at all. Now it's just going to happen in a meeting where, you know, something will be discussed, and depending on the political wave of the majority of the council, some organizations may be given, oh, we'll give you another 60 days. But they will do it in public instead of doing it back there. Perhaps that's an improvement. I agree. It is an improvement. We're going to do it in public. Okay? But it does not remove the political tides behind this. I would prefer to have an impartial policy that establishes what the consequences are and they're acted on regardless of who is up here. Thank you.
Councilmember Acosta, and then my turn.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. I think that that's actually a fantastic point. And so I think that maybe there's a balance of the two, right? So maybe council's discretion really only goes so far. So we want it to be transparent. We want to be in the know. So maybe it does need to come to council. But really, you know, we limit our authority in a sense where when they get to a certain level of noncompliance, it's out of anybody's hands. This is automatically the action that occurs. But I think that that's a great point.
Absolutely. I mean, we are not all powerful here. We have to have limits.
Okay, I think one of the things we've discussed repeatedly is that some portions of the staff wrote reports, and then some of those came to the council and some of them didn't, and what was done and what wasn't done. And I think the very first thing that this does is bring it out in a public hearing, not in a closed session, not on a consent calendar. It puts it right out in front of the public. And Tom, I'm not trying to embarrass you, but you wouldn't want to be drugged before the council, would you? No. And I think that's a bigger deterrent than a lot of other things. So I think this is a good policy. However, I do agree that probably we need to have, when we look at the prospective policy. Prospective policy. There you go. It's okay. We'll get here yet. I think with regard to item number 11, which we'll talk about next, that we may need to talk about more certainty in some of those things. And remember that at the end of the day, the buck stops here. So anything we set up, someone else can change. And that's the way life is, because we won't be here forever. So we need to put the best things in place going forward so that they're functional and usable. Okay, with regard to number 10, is everybody comfortable with number 10 before we start working on number 11?
Yes,
Council member?
I'm fine.
Okay. All good with number 10. Okay, we got 10. Now let's go to 11. And again, we're talking about a prospective policy. Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah. This is where I think that we should include in this here, all that we talk about here is financial. I think that we ought to also include covenants in this. Anything that's required other than, you know, for these people to maintain their compliancy. And I think that this could be drafted as a staff recommendation on a council agenda very easily, where we would deal with one. You have an 8-unit apartment. Somebody hasn't turned in the proper rent for, you know, to meet the covenant on it. They're out of compliance. That doesn't need to come to council. But these would be recommendations that would come from whoever's going to head up CDBG, redevelopment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that each one of these should, in 11, should be a staff responsibility to make a recommendation to council.
Yeah, and I think number E down there is kind of the catch-all at the end of the day, which says any other consequences, 11E, any other consequences outlined in the original application for funds, and we probably would add to that, or covenants, would kind of wrap it all up. Everybody good with that? Councilmember Martin.
Any other consequences outlined in the original application for funds, that's perhaps not only just covenants, it's perhaps maintenance or a whole bunch of other contractual obligations that may have been in there. The loan application, the loan will have a contractual obligation with certain stipulations, so it's all of them. And it needs to be stated as that,
Okay, I think
all the contractual obligations that came with that loan.
I don't know what the correct phraseology would be. The word I hear constantly is covenants, but I agree with what you're saying. I just don't know what the wording would be. So would you be able to insert the appropriate wording, please?
Mayor, Council, the one thing that I tried to stay away from is the compliance issues that they're related to the funding and the properties, but they're not related to a simple audit of the agency. The Management Services Department does not currently have the staffing that would be able to allow us to verify whether these various entities are complying with any of those other compliance-related items. On page 7, we talk about the pending report from Urban Futures that would allow for a policy specifically related to compliance issues. This set is really drafted specifically for financial issues, and the compliance aspect of the entities should be addressed in the report that Urban Futures is going to provide. Management Services just doesn't have the resources nor the expertise to say that the maintenance requirements on such and such a property are being complied with. We could do that if we were able to get the additional staffing to do that, but I don't think that is the direction that we would like. I don't think that's the direction that Council would like to go, to create a whole other bureaucracy to be able to manage things that are already being managed by other departments.
You're right. I went off track. I take it back. Councilmember Starbuck.
I'm not going to say you're right, but I understand what you're saying, but it does not alleviate the central report that needs to be available. We'll need financial. We'll need redevelopment. We'll need CDBG. We're going to need somebody, obviously, that can put these all together to make sure that this is all in compliance. This may be the beginning of something way back, that somebody the right hand didn't talk to the left hand. I don't think it's appropriate language for this grand jury response, but when we go to develop our policy, I think that it's going to become very important that we tie all of these loans and all of these covenants into one controllable sheet, a tickler of some sort, but yeah.
I agree. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I agree that, in regards to recommendation 1B, this is an appropriate response. But I really hope staff is aware that that is going to be very important to the City Council in regards to a policy. So please be prepared for some recommendations after we receive that report. Thank you.
Okay, number 12. The policy does not apply if funds are for city services obtained through normal procurement procedures, and that would be through purchasing or our normal contracting procedures. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Staff, could you just elaborate on that point a little bit? I am somewhat confused on what that means.
I looked at the expenditures that we do on an annual basis, and we have about roughly 110 entities that we pay more than $50,000 to on an annual basis. PERS for health care and retirement, the IRS for tax deductions, income payments. Those are things that are obviously not related to this policy. And this statement is basically just talking that if we have a nonprofit that is providing services to us that we would usually be doing as a city function, it wouldn't apply to that. It also doesn't apply to contracts for for-profit entities that are doing work for the city. We're trying to address the fact that this is only for things that where somebody comes to us and asks for funds to do something that's related to their interests and maybe an interest of the city as well, but it's not the core function of the city providing the basic services outside this request from the agency.
So, for instance, the I can't think of the name of the company that we buy limestone from, that we write them a check every month for about $25,000, and for the water treatment plant, this would not apply to them.
Anything like that, yeah. If anything that's normally something that we would get that furthers the business of the city.
Everybody good with that? Okay. Item number 13, the policy shall provide for a funding mechanism in the city's biannual budget to support the additional resources necessary to carry out this policy by the Management Services Department. And that process starts next month. Everybody good with that? If we want to get it done, we got to put some money aside for it. Councilmember Martiner.
I have issues with that. You know, we say that we had all of these systems in place and that we, did a great job, but now we're saying, no, we don't have the money. Haven't we already within the organization assigned the responsibility for the contract compliance? Why are we asking for more money? And number two, we are also, a recommendation of 3B is that the agencies will bear the cost of the financial audit. So why is the Management Services Director asking for money when we're saying that the agencies will bear the cost? We're also saying that we didn't fail in oversight because this didn't apply to us and that didn't apply to us, but all the contracts that the city has does have some financial obligations, but we're saying we don't have any allocations of money, we don't have people. The logic defies me. If we never have had a responsibility for contract compliance, because we didn't have the resources, and we're asking for it now, isn't that mean that we have not followed our contractual obligations because we didn't have people or resources to do so? We're asking for money now after we failed.
The Management Services Department, in recommendation 3B, the recommendation by the grand jury states that the City of Lompoc appropriates the necessary funds to allow the Management Services Director to conduct annual audits per recommendation 1B, or where permissible, require that organizations request grants or loans in excess of $50,000 to bear the cost of an annual audit. This item is to address recommendation 3B, and yes, we are asking that the policy require that the agencies bear the cost of the audit, but there are compliance requests of us to start preparing new reports to the council to state what those compliances are, what the status are for those entities that are subject to this policy. That may not be very material, but it's still new resources that are being requested to comply with this policy. It may not include, it will likely not include new personnel. It will likely not include new equipment, but it will require additional resources that will be taken away from other services that the Management Services Department provides. And that's what the direction of this item is about.
Mr. Wilkie, you reported to us back when we made the request that we wanted to have all of LHCDC loans studied and looked after and figure out where all the loans went, under what conditions and what contracts. And you stated that given all of that, the city already had to spend over $80,000 in staff time to do so. Then we went and hired a contractor, which is not here tonight, that should have been here tonight, and that cost us $10,000 or $15,000. $80,000 versus $10,000-$15,000 on a report that we haven't received yet. So I don't understand this black hole of city resources with staff. Every time we ask for something, we don't have the resources, we need to allocate more resources. But then at the same time, we're told we have the system in place, we haven't done anything wrong, we comply with everything, we follow the contract. To me, the logic defies me. I mean, we either don't have the system in place and we don't have the resources, or we do and do the job. But we can't have both. And right now, this whole report is telling us that we cannot have both. So I really have difficulties with that. I wish that we were more specific. I mean, when you told us that there were over $80,000 that the staff was going to spend in staff time to compile this report, that a contractor is going to charge us $15,000, that does not make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense. So I don't know what this allocation of monies is about, and where does it go, and how much money you will need to generate a report and basically make sure that we're compliant with our contracts. Need to be more specific, really. If it's going to be a couple of hours, okay, let's put it down. If it's going to be $80,000 because the council makes a request, but then really it's done by somebody else for $10,000, I want to know.
Brad, what I think I'm understanding from this is that now we're taking on this audit management responsibility. So let me just walk through it and see if I've got it right. So each organization that fits these criteria has an audit performed. That audit then comes to the city. Someone in your department would look at that audit and make sure that everything was good with the organization, because just because we get a document, that doesn't provide us with the analysis. And then based on that analysis, you would construct the report that's going to come to council for those that are, for lack of a better term, compliant. And on a parallel course, you're monitoring those people that don't turn in their audits, and you're sending them a friendly reminder 30 days in advance and a not quite so friendly reminder 30 days after, and you're monitoring those things and carrying them forward and then bringing recommendations to council. And what I think I'm understanding here is that these are new responsibilities and there's going to be some cost associated with it, and it may not be a new cost to the city, it may be a reallocation of existing costs within other departments. Is that kind of where you're going with this?
Well, it would be something new to the Management Services Department. It may not relieve the other departments from having to review those as well as part of their compliance reviews. This is not meant to be something that replaces the requirements for CDBG, the former RDA, and the like. That's why this is something that's most likely will be new, most likely small, but it will also be dependent on the number of agencies that are actually subject to this policy, and to some extent it will be related to how many of those fail to be compliant. Because if everybody is compliant and we receive the audits and review them, that's the end of it, except for a staff report that says everybody's in compliance. If 1, 2, or 3 are not in compliance, it provides additional new duties that have to be done, the reminder letters, the reporting to council on that specific entity's noncompliance. Those are the types of new costs that I'm talking about.
And some of those costs may not be new in terms of the city having an actual increase in cost, but it may be the reallocation of someone's time differently within the budget than it has been in the past.
Correct.
Okay, so we're not necessarily looking at spending more money. We're just looking at how the money we're spending is allocated based on these duties.
Right, and it would probably replace something else that's currently being done.
Okay, thank you. I'm comfortable with this. Anyone else have a question? Everybody good with it? Councilmember Costa? Okay. Then we have recommendation 2B and the last tidbit. I think from here on it's probably just the same recommendations we just approved that are restated to cover a specific item with regard to the grand jury, and by going through items 1 through 13 now, we've basically completed everything down through the bottom of page 14, and now we're on page 15, the conclusion.
Marilyn, I think on page 12 of 14, there's those bullet points. You might want to go through those if we need to.
Yes, you are correct. Okay. So in addition to the above points, specific considerations regarding the resources necessary to comply with the recommendations include: the policy would not supersede the City Council's budget setting authority. Costs related to complying with the recommended policy would be considered in conjunction with the City Council's overall budget setting authority during the preparation of each two-year budget, which begins next month. Compliance costs may be relatively minor, but could include any functional type of costs such as staffing, salaries and benefits, contract for services or supplies, and capital outlay. And I think Mr. Wilkie addressed all those previously. The next opportunity to fund this recommendation would be the 13-15 budget, and we start planning for that next month. Everybody good with those? Okay. So now the conclusion, which is on page 13 of 14, beginning with the word conclusion. If everybody could read that independently. Yeah, I can do that. Conclusion. Although the recommended City Council policy has specified the types of organizations subject to it, the City of Lompoc has outlined a policy that embodies the intention of each grand jury recommendation, such that when nonprofit organizations are provided with public monies by means of loans or grants for vital public services and purposes, how that public funding is distributed, used, and accounted for results in the retention of the public trust. The City Council policy regarding nonprofits that receive city funding of more than $50,000 or with annual budgets of $100,000 or more will result in procedures that protect those expenditures and ensure accountability by the nonprofit and the city and regain the public's trust. This recommended policy, along with existing well-structured systems designed to provide checks and internal controls, will assist the City of Lompoc in safeguarding limited public resources. The above concludes the City's response to the grand jury's report entitled "A Failure of Oversight, Lompoc Housing and Community Development Corporation." The City respectfully submits this response to the grand jury and graciously appreciates all of the efforts associated with this 2011-12 grand jury report. And then for additional information, but I think that's just filler. Anything in there? Everybody good with that one? Yes? Oh, sorry. Councilman Martner?
I would like to take out the existing well-structured systems. I don't really know what that means. existing well-structured systems. I think it's just, again, saying we didn't do anything wrong, but if we didn't do anything wrong, I don't know why we're here. Okay, why are we in this huge mess that LHCDC created for us? So we do not have well-structured systems. If we do, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. So I would really request that we take out the along with existing well-structured systems and just say this recommended policy designed to provide checks and internal controls will assist the City of Lompoc in safeguarding limited public resources.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I would actually edit that further because I'm going to go back to my initial point to say this recommended policy is a little bit of a misnomer, right, because we haven't completed the policy quite yet. So some kind of reference to a future policy that will be established and sent to them will be designed to provide checks and internal controls that will assist the City of Lompoc in safeguarding limited public resources.
Who's next? Councilmember Starbuck.
Delete the paragraph.
I think it would be good to reference again that we are establishing this policy, but not reference this recommended policy because I don't think that we're there quite yet. And yeah, and I would agree that we should take out what Councilmember Martiner suggested as well.
Councilmember Lingle.
I don't think we should strike it, and I don't think we have to modify it a lot. This recommended policy, this does not indicate that there is a policy. It says this recommended policy. It indicates that the policy doesn't exist. It's a recommended policy. So the way I'd recommend we say it is this recommended policy along with a well-structured system designed to provide checks and internal controls. Not existing, but a well-structured system. And that's what we're trying to create. We're trying to create a policy that has well-structured systems. So I think all we have to do is strike out existing and replace it with the word a, along with a well-structured system, or a well-structured, along with well-structured systems.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm okay with changing existing to A, but I still think we need to change the wording on this recommended policy.
And I agree. Can't get a wording though. Joe, you got an idea?
I was thinking the ultimate policy.
How about this?
We're not that
Sounds
good.
like a large hamburger.
Marilyn?
Sir.
Why don't we just add a sentence at the end of that that says the established policy will be forwarded to the grand jury upon adoption?
Yeah, I think Councilmember Martiner's point is that we're saying there's a recommended policy and we're not quite comfortable with that phrase. I think maybe if we said these recommendations along with a well-structured system designed to provide checks and internal controls will assist the City of Lompoc in safeguarding limited public resources, and then your sentence that we're going to send it to them.
I agree with that.
Yeah. That good for everybody?
Well, we have 3.
Okay. I guess we won. Okay. Anything else anyone has on this? I think we've about beat this to death. So now I need a motion to approve based on the changes that we made as we worked our way through it.
So moved.
And a second.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a move and a second. And is there any further discussion? Seeing none, could we vote, please? That passes 5-0. Okay. Joe, since we have to go back to closed session, will we normally take care of these things first or go back to closed session and then take care of these things?
I would suggest taking care of these things first.
Okay.
I will not be
Yeah. Oh, no, you can't leave because we might have something for you to be involved in. You never know. So, written communications. Any written communications? Nope. Oral communications. 2 minutes to address us on any subject. Anyone out there?
I'd just like to make a suggestion on what you just decided. It's kind of open-ended on any date to submit this to the grand jury.
No, it has to be submitted day after tomorrow.
This does.
Yes.
But the policy. It's kind of open-ended on down the road. Can we start putting some dates to things and following through? These future dates and down the road, and I can't keep track of them all, and you guys don't either. So this is important, and I think that policy is important. It's been a year in coming. Can we agendize that? And can we set a date in the response to the grand jury?
Okay.
Just my suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so everybody knows, in our book every week are all the future items that are out there. So they're not lost in space, but in many cases we try to schedule the number of items at a meeting based on what we have on the agenda. So for instance, this evening we anticipated having the report from the consultant, so we took a lot of things off this agenda and put them on next week anticipating this. And I wish agenda forecasting was perfect, but it's not. But don't worry, it doesn't get lost. It's still here with us. Next.
It's scheduled for October 16th, according to us.
I was getting, Yedidia DeVries, I was getting up first to second what Pam said, but also to reiterate my comment from before that I hope that when the policy is discussed, that staff is directed not only to turn the bullet points in this assiduously crafted response to the grand jury, but that the policy also address or potentially address broader issues such as the covenant compliance and also outreach and assistance to those affected by LHCDC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Energy, former council member. One thing, I'm tired of getting thrown under the bus. I was on the council during part of this time with LHCDC. And to set blame for past councils, I think it's more like the perfect storm. Everything happened, and for you all, some of you weren't sitting up there, and the community wanted this to happen, wanted LHCDC. So we did our best to help make it happen, and LHCDC dropped the ball. So I think you need to put some of that in perspective. Also, when we were on council, and I have two other former council members here, we did know about the non-compliance. And it goes on and on and on. And I think when you set your policy, instead of giving them 10 months, you need to tighten that time frame up to 30 days, 60 days. Because what happened with LHCDC, we did send letters, you're out of compliance, and it goes on and on and on and on. And I think you need to just set a shorter time frame for when you're going to drop the bomb on the organization or withdraw their money, because what happened with LHCDC, it just went on, And I want to apologize for the mess, but I think you're doing a really good job on closing the barn door.
Thank you.
Dwayne Holmdahl. Council, some excellent discussion tonight. The only thing I'm going to say is that you made a lot of changes, and I hope everybody got to write it down, because I guess it has to be in 2 days. And this council's not going to meet again, but you're supposed to be doing this since last October. I think that every council member should see that document before it goes to the grand jury. And I know you can't have a meeting, or you can. You have the right to call a meeting if you have a reason to look at it. But I think that's one thing. There's a lot of good comments come up, and LHAC, that's another thing that goes out there. And everybody dropped the ball on it at times. But you also had a community out there that was pushing it, as Ann said. And you had community members that were highly qualified and well-liked in the community that was bringing those documents to our staff and going through it. So I think that's what I think you should do, or even the public would like to see, what you really are sending to the grand jury. That's an awful tight time frame. Do it tonight and send it in 2 days. But I think you all should look at it before it goes to the grand jury. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Do council requests and announcements, or do those after? Joe? No? Okay. Council requests and announcements. Councilmember Martner.
There is a group of citizens working to form a nonprofit with the aim of taking on the restoration and running of the Lompoc Theater. The group is called the Lompoc Theater Project, and they would like to give a presentation to the council and present to them their idea on how they will take on this project, the restoration of the Lompoc Theater and the operation of the Lompoc Theater. They're requesting to have a presentation to the council on the September 18th, and I will need 2 other votes to make that happen.
I'll second.
Okay. No. Can he vote? No. I think we need to look. I'd ask all of you to turn to the front of your book and look at the items that we have for September 18th, and realize that the item that was continued from tonight is also now on September 18th. And I don't think there's any possible way we can add anything else to September 18th. October 2nd, it looks way more doable. But many of the things that are on September 18th were moved because of what we were going to have tonight. And a number of them have time constraints.
I guess the only reason why I'm saying September 18th, because it was only about 2 council meetings ago where we had like 3 presentations in the front, and the meeting went on until after midnight. So again, there is an arbitrariness of how the urgency of these agenda items get put on the agenda. This group requested to me that it would be done on September 18th, and that's what I'm bringing to the council.
Okay. I think, given the number of issues that are involved with the Lompoc Theater, that we might want to consider, and I was going to actually bring it up, but you got a little ahead of me, having a meeting to just discuss the Lompoc Theater and the many things that are involved with that.
Mr. Mayor, this group likes to provide a presentation to the council and the public on their project. I don't see, perhaps it could be included in an agenda item, but they made a specific request. They like to be heard by this council and the public on their project. We allowed many organizations to come forth and give a presentation. It's not a decision-making, it's not an agenda item, it's a presentation. And as such, I think it needs to be respected.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Lingle.
Maybe this is for the attorney. Would it be appropriate that we allow a presentation? This is just a presentation, no decisions can be made. Say we start at 5:30 for the presentation, from 5:30 to 6 o'clock, and then we have the council meeting at 6 o'clock.
You can certainly do that if you want.
Ms. Martin, would that work?
I think the presentation needs to be part of the council meeting, like any other presentation. If you like to start a council meeting at 6 o'clock, that's an option that this council can decide, but I think the presentation needs to be part of a council meeting.
I agree with Mrs. Martner. It needs to be part of a council meeting, and I'm surely willing to come in an hour early for the full agenda of the 18th, which looks like a long one. So how about we do that? Now, City Administrator.
Mr. Mayor and Council, you do have a joint meeting scheduled with the Utilities Commission that starts at 3:30.
6:30. So perhaps we could bump them to 6, and then by 6:30 we could be ready to take on this one. How about that? There's always a way. Everybody good with starting at 6?
My assumption is that there would be a closed session as well.
Yeah, probably. So everybody can be here at noon. We should be able to start right on time.
So what do I?
So we'll if we want to work this in, then we would start our meeting with the Utility Commission at 6, and we would have our closed session prior to that based on the amount of items that we're on for the closed session, which hopefully will be small, so after we finish most of them up tonight.
Another consideration is if you want to move the joint meeting to another council night.
Okay, do we have a joint meeting on?
No, this is the last joint meeting that you have for the year.
Okay, so we could have the joint meeting on October 2nd. Okay, everybody good with that idea? Okay, so we'll move that to October 2nd. And then we'll begin the council meeting at 6:30 with the closed session prior to that based on the scheduling load.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, but I see the Lompoc Record and the news press is no longer here, but we have to make sure that we publicize the early meeting. And I don't know how we're going to get that word out. So maybe we can get the word to the, I'm sorry, the Lompoc Record is still here. I was looking for John, I'm sorry. Okay, so the Lompoc Record is still here. Maybe we can make sure
we'll get something from the news press. No problem.
Sorry.
Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, got that one done. Okay, Councilmember Martin, do you have anything else to report or request?
Not at this time.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I just want to report that I will be leaving tomorrow and returning on Friday for the annual League of California Cities Conference, and that is at the city's cost. Thank you.
And similarly, I am leaving tomorrow morning along with to go to this League of Cities at city cost. I had a number of meetings over the past 2 weeks, many of them focused on some of the economic development projects that are coming along, and all I can say is life is good. I do have one request. I recently was discussing with the county the issue of the redevelopment agency, and I discovered that the county staff had sent an email out to close out you do a Form 700 closing out for the redevelopment agency, and we hadn't taken that step yet, and I wanted to pass this out so our city attorney could look at that and you all could look at it. The county's thought is that redevelopment agencies no longer exist, so we need to close out as city officials with regard to that. So you gave one to him, I hope. No. And you
if I may, through the mayor, there are some attorneys who think that needs to happen and some attorneys who don't.
Well, my goal wasn't to get you to answer tonight, but perhaps at the next meeting you could render an opinion on whether we should go down this road.
I'll send you a memo.
A memo. Do we get it at the drinking fountain? Do we get the memo at the drinking fountain? Is that where we'll find it? Okay. Perhaps you'd be kind enough at next council meeting to respond to that. Councilmember Starbuck.
Everybody has a request tonight, and I have two. So I'd like to get a council consensus that we go ahead and revisit the consortium for the CDBG. There's reasons on that. I think that there was some entitlement money that we did not receive. I think that we are still an entitlement city, and I think that there may be a chance that we could possibly become a little bit wealthier with CDBG. I'd like to relook at this issue before it's due.
When is the due date for that, Teresa?
Council took action to renew that agreement a couple meetings ago. So a due date is not, it is a done, the renewal is a done thing. We're in our final year of the first 3-year agreement, but it automatically renews based upon the action we took. If you'd like to reconsider it, you can see what the clause is for that.
Could you come back to us with that information, or maybe, thank you, at the next meeting?
We'll need a consensus.
I would like to ask a legal question.
Surely.
According to the Roberts Rules of Order, myself and Mayor Ling voted against that. Are we allowed to second and third this, even though we were not in the, in the, whatever is called the prominent, you know what I'm talking about?
It happened in our
No, it didn't happen in the last meeting. It happened 2 meetings ago. It was a 3-2 vote. Mayor Lynn and I voted against going for the consortium. So my question is, I definitely support it, but I am in the minority. And I think according to the rules, I'm not allowed to do this, but I want confirmation.
No, that only affects the meeting after.
The structure of Robert's Rules is not always precisely able to be used by a public agency because of the nature of Robert's Rules was not for a public agency. So it's always adopted with the understanding that there may be some parts of it that don't really fit all the tools that Robert's Rules sets up. And one of those things is a council has the right to review things when the council wants to review things if there's 3 people on the council that want to review it. It doesn't have to always be brought back by someone who voted on one side or didn't vote on the other side. So that's used typically so that something doesn't keep coming back and back and back. So my suggestion to you is I believe you have the authority to ask for this information to be brought to the council. You also have the authority to, if you want, to be more specific on how you apply Robert's Rules and say the only time that anything can ever be reviewed, if it's already come to the council, is to only have someone who is on the for side bring it back.
Okay, so what does the council would allow to do and the interpretation of the Roberts Rule? I would like to be able to support Council Member Starbuck option, but I am in the minority. If the council allows me to do so, I will do so. But if I'm not allowed, I won't.
Typically, a move to reconsider is something that you would do the meeting after something took place. So that moment is kind of past, and I think what City Attorney is saying is that the council has the ability to relook at anything it chooses to relook at when it wants to relook at it. Therefore, we can. So you can, and I will. And he did. So that's 3.
That went pretty easy.
I finally got one right tonight. Life is good.
Other requests.
Bob, you can chime in if you want to do that too. Okay.
He's turning into me. The other thing I wanted to do is for the budget hearing, prior to us going into budget in October, and I've talked to Mr. Wilkie about this, and I'd like to make council aware. And we purchased property, number 1 Riverbend Road. We purchased this property in 2008. We've been using money that we received from RV rentals out there to pay for the property, I thought. What's actually been happening with this is that we're taking money that we're receiving for rental out there, and all we're doing is paying interest. And for 4 years, we've paid $17,000 a year just on interest. And in 4 years, we've not touched the principal. There are some funding sources available that may be used to develop it if it was to pan out, that we might start to be able to pay the principal on it. We owe $320,000 on it. So I think it's important that as a council that we look at this hard during the budget hearing, and I would hope that we would get a 5-person consent on this, because we've been several years with just interest only. and I know that there's got to be something we can do. So.
Yeah, I agree. We should look at that in the budget process and see how we're going to go forward. This is the parcel of land on the west side of the entry road to River Park, so across the river on Highway 246, that was purchased to develop an expansion to the RV park. And then we didn't really have the money at that point, because that's kind of when the economy was turning left. And then also there was some discussion with the county over the floodplain. Now we will be hearing the revised floodplain ordinance in the near future to be in compliance with a new FEMA requirement. And it is possible that as part of that, we may find a way to make something happen there. So I agree with Councilmember Starbuck that should be one of our discussion topics when we have our budget hearings. And we would need one more person to add that to the discussion topics at the budget hearings. No? No one wants it? Oh, okay. You and I are out in the cold. Okay. Anything else? Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended a NCPA meeting in Murphys, California on the 22nd and 23rd of last month. There was city expense for mileage and a motel room. And I attended an RDA oversight committee here in council chambers on the 27th.
Okay, are there anything else? Okay, then we will adjourn back to closed session. We're going to recess to closed session. I stand corrected. If you all want to hang out, we'll be back.